We are pain, that's all. We are God.
Yo guys! I'm Yuruzi. Here's part 4 of What If Naruto Studied Fuinjutsu. While exploring the Team 7 training ground, a young Naruto happens to stumble across a strangely shaped kunai embedded in a tree. Years of frustration and deciphering later, he finally cracks the Fuinjutsu. A ghost of the Otsutsuki sets in motion a plan to end his family's eternal conflict. Spill from Sasuke's nose. He backed away, gasping in pain, as Kakashi whipped a kick at Hinata. Having more time than her teammates, she was able to duck under the blow. Veins bulged around her eyes as she leapt toward the man with her hands bathed in blue chakra. She was shocked when he caught her wrists and spun her in a circle, before flinging her into her blonde teammate, who was still struggling to get up. They crashed into each other with a satisfying thud, and Kakashi rounded on Sasuke, who was still clutching his nose. Sasuke opened one clenched eye to see a fist rocketing towards his face. All he could do was brace himself as the punch sent him flying back. Dirt was torn up as he rolled away from the jounin. Sasuke clutched his aching face in his hands as he angrily glared at his sensei. Hinata was holding her hip as she tried to help up her teammate, who was trying to regain his breath. Like I told you, for the next month, I am going to drag you all through hell and back. If you manage to survive, you might learn a thing or two. Now come at me. Hinata was shivering. Gone was the jovial Kakashi that they had grown to know during training. This was the stone-cold assassin she had glimpsed when he drove his hand through the jounin's chest. Naruto was finally able to stand on his own and was glaring daggers at their sensei. Oh, he was going to get it for that cheap shot. He and Sasuke shared a glance and raced towards the man. It was a storm of fists and kicks, as they assaulted him. One would attack from below, as the other would move in at the man's chest. He barely seemed to move as the two genin bounced around the man. No matter what they did, there was an arm or knee to block their attacks. All of his moves were precise, thought out, and delivered with the power of a piston. Kakashi blocked simultaneous kicks from the boys on both sides as felt a presence behind him. He grabbed Naruto's leg and swung him into Sasuke, before diving out of the way of Hinata's strike. The two were sent flying away as Hinata engaged the man. She was growing more and more frustrated as he just seemed to dance out of the way of all her strikes. With her Byakugan, she could see Sasuke push the blonde off him and begin to forming his chakra. She continued a few strikes before replacing herself with a block of wood as he screamed, "Katon, Fireball Jutsu." A raging ball of fire raced towards the jounin, engulfing the spot he had occupied. Sasuke stared at the burning fire for a second before scanning the surrounding tree line. Where did he go? Kakashi appeared out of nowhere and delivered a roundhouse kick to the boy's side. As Sasuke tumbled out of the way, Kakashi noticed a shadow growing beneath him and heard Naruto scream as he fell from above with a kunai in hand. Without looking, he threw a kunai of his own at the clone faster than it could see, causing it to disappear in a puff of smoke. Without breaking a sweat, Kakashi plunged his hand into the earth below him and yanked up a sputtering Naruto by the throat. Never pull the same trick on an opponent you have already faced, Kakashi chided as tightened his grip. Yeah, I know, he tried to sputter. There was a loud pop as the kunai the destroyed clone had been holding transformed and raced toward Kakashi with a piece of paper in his hand. In the blink of an eye, Kakashi swiped the paper out of the clone's hand, smacked it onto the original's forehead, and proceeded to drive a kunai through the skull of the shocked clone. Kakashi relinquished his grasp of Naruto and raised one hand in a seal. He quietly murmured, "Activate," causing the real Naruto to plummet into the ground, leaving a small crater. "God damn it," he muttered through clenched teeth as he struggled to move. "Remember not to let your opponents use your own moves against you." Kakashi whipped around and grabbed the wrist of his female student, who had been silently creeping up on him. He continued her forward motion and directed her hand toward the ground. He plunged her glowing hand into the thigh of her blonde teammate, who cried out in pain as his thigh started cramping and his tenketsu was forcibly closed. "Naru," she began to scream, but was caught off as Kakashi wrapped her arm uncomfortably behind her back. She gasped in pain as he tightened his grip. "The same goes for you too, Hinata. Be wary of taijitsu users who will aim to redirect your attacks." Hinata winced from his grip and tried to turn her head to face the man. She stopped when she saw something that made her eyes widen. Instantly, the veins receded from her face and she squeezed her eyes shut. A second later, a kunai harmlessly sailed over her head, right in front of the Jounin's face. He was able to glance it and notice a small ball tied to the handle just in time. Flashbang, Kakashi thought before it lit up. He let go of Hinata as Sasuke raced towards him to take advantage of his momentary blindness. Good. They know not to let up. Each one has been attacking me, one after the other, in an attempt to capitalize on my divided attention. They know they are outmatched, so they are resorting to trying to trick me when I'm distracted. Even with his vision impaired, Kakashi and Sasuke began a one-sided taijitsu bout as Hinata stumbled up to Naruto. Her eyes had been closed, but that flashbang had still gone off very close to her. She rubbed her eyes as she tried to talk to her crush. Naruto-kun, how do I undo the gravity seal? He grunted as he tried to turn his head to her. Normally, you'd just form the release sign, but mine are more complicated than that. I designed them so only my chakra could release them. Either I need to form the release sign or I need to force my chakra through the seal. You could try to rip it off, but I'd like to keep the skin on my face. Right now, I'm so weighed down I can't move my arms. She shook off the blush that threatened to spread across her face as she reached out for his hands. If she could get his fingers into the proper hand sign, he could release the seal. She lightly tugged on his arms, but was now pulling as hard as she could to lift his hand. It wouldn't budge. How strong did you make this thing? About 6 times Earth's gravity, he muttered, avoiding eye contact. All right, she needed a new plan. Hinata once again activated her Byaguan and knelt beside him. She placed 2 fingers along his back, just above his heart. What are you doing? I am trying to direct the flow of chakra from your heart to your forehead by nudging it along with my own chakra. Please be quiet, I need to focus on carefully maneuvering the chakra out your aorta and through your chakra system. If I move too much, my chakra might cut into your veins. Focus on the area under the seal, and prepare for my signal. Even through his stiff pain, he was surprised. This was the Hinata he knew, when she went into what he called her doctor mode. Gone was the shy and timid girl, and in came the composed, no-nonsense, semi-professional. She began gently tracing her fingers up his back as she directed the flow of his chakra. Despite the dire situation they were in, he was getting ticklish and tried his best not to squirm. It was odd to say the least as she ran her fingers up and down his back following the chakra flow, and he could help but blush from her touch. She traced her delicate fingers up his neck and along his cheek until finally she said, now. He was blushing up a storm as he squinted his eyes and forced his chakra into the tag. The paper glowed blue before it peeled off his face and fluttered to the ground. Thank you, he stuttered as he tried to get up. He gasped in pain and collapsed as he held his leg. Would you mind? Of course, she smiled as she lightly jabbed the tenketsu in his leg. The built-up pressure dissipated as her foreign chakra was removed from his system. They began to smile at one another as Sasuke landed in a heap right next front of them. Sasuke-kun, team! They each grabbed an arm and started to help the panting boy to his feet. He was covered in scratches and marks they could tell would form into nasty bruises. They all began to glare at their sensei, who was casually strolling up to them. This is just the warm-up, my adorable little genin. For the next month, I am going to be beating you all into the ground, so you better get used to this. Come now, no need for frowns. Guess what? Considering what I have in store, Hinata will soon be able to patch you all up in no time. We'll have our own little medic who can heal you up, just so we can start all over again. Doesn't that sound fun? The genin were trembling as their doom slowly marched towards them. They couldn't tell if his smile was genuine or not. Was he doing it to mess with them, or did he really get a kick out of this? He leaned over them and said, let's get to work. 2 training fields over, teammate was having a much more tranquil training session. Kiba and Shino were sitting in the shade as Akamaru cheered on Sakura, who was sparred with Kurenai. She breath came out heavy pants and her whole body was drenched in sweat, but she pushed her exhaustion to the side as she lunged at the older woman. The fresh Jounin simply weaved out the way of her punches and landed light taps along her body. Finally, she held up a hand and said, stop. That is enough for now. Sakura had her hands on her knees as she smiled up at her role model. You have come a long way, Sakura. I'm very proud of your improvement. Thank you, sensei, the younger girl beamed. Kurenai couldn't have been more proud as she stared down at her pupil. There had been some problems early on, but she had made sure to stamp those out quickly. The girl was fiercely intelligent and had the most superb chakra control she had ever seen in a genin. While this was due to her smaller than average chakra reserves, it was far easier to increase one's reserves than mastering control. The girl had simply flourished under the attention of a female mentor. In a world of predominantly male shinobi, it was rare to find a female role model amongst the ranks of their forces. There were always the tales of the legendary Tsunade, but stories could only go so far. Some people needed that model person in their life to guide them along their path of becoming a better person. Kurenai was more than a little humbled when the girl had shown up in attire similar to hers. Instead of her red sleeve, it was pink to match her hair. It was like getting to train her own little protege, but not quite to the extent that Guy had gone with his student. Sakura had burned through the genjutsu material Kurenai had set out for her in a heartbeat, and was already moving on to develop her own. Oh, Sakura was her pride and joy, but that didn't mean she wasn't also proud of her other students as well. Kiba's skill in Taijitsu was nothing to laugh at, but that was not the main reason she was proud of him. Kiba could be rash and hot-headed, but his personality is what brought the team together. His partner techniques and pack mentality really helped unify the three of them. Of course, Sakura was always there to keep him in line whenever he went too far. A quick bop in the head and he was whimpering like a dog with his tail between his legs. Shino, on the other hand, was quiet and calculative. He would most stay out of most of their conversations and only chime in to propose an outside view of the situation. His analytical mind helped rein in Kiba's impulsiveness and gain points with Sakura. She had originally been put off by the bug user's techniques, but that had been stamped away after her long talk with Kurenai regarding her future as a kunoichi. That was her purpose, the middle ground. She could sometimes be as hot-headed and passionate as Kiba, but also able to take a step back and look at a situation calmly like Shino. Kurenai smiled as she looked over at the boys. "You better look out, Kiba. Pretty soon she'll be dropping you in an all-out spar." "Yeah right," Kiba scoffed, as if she could actually lay a scratch on me. "I don't care how much better she's gotten, no little girl." He felt a large amount of killing intent and yelped as he stared at the dark figure looming above him. A dark silhouette of his teammate stared down at him. "Oh, what's wrong with being a girl?" The dark figure boomed as it cracked its knuckles. "And nothing, Sakura-chan, I just meant." "Oh, I know what you meant. I'm not just very happy about it." "See, come on, Sakura-chan," he stuttered as he backed into a tree. "Is all this genjutsu really necessary?" The dark figure loomed above him with glowing yellow eyes. Pink hair cascaded and whipped around her as a white smile lit up her face. "Yes, I think it is. Really brings out the fear in your eyes. Besides, all you're seeing is what you think of me. Are you saying you're really afraid of some helpless, little girl?" Kiba whimpered as he braced himself for the impending beatdown. Shino shook his head as he watched the antics of his teammates. Kiba just couldn't keep his big mouth shut. You would think being on a team with a female jounin would beat out that kind of mindset. It still impressed him how Sakura seemed to be able to create genjutsu without even realizing it. Kurenai found out one day as Sakura went off on Kiba for something stupid he did. She was glaring at him while flames seemed to flare up behind her and a dark figure loomed over her head. Kurenai had surprised until Shino told her she had been doing this for years. Her class had just grown accustomed to it, unless it was directed at them. Kurenai's eyes had been as wide as stars as she excitedly raced up the girl. It was fantastic. To create genjutsu without needing hand signs or even on purpose created so many possibilities. Kurenai massaged her forehead as she listened to Kiba's cries of pain. He just couldn't keep a lid on it. "I don't think he's ever going to learn," she said as she turned to Shino. "Probably not. If he was going to change, he probably would have learned after the third beating." She sighed as they stared at their antics. All in all, she was very pleased with their progress. They had even gone off on their first C-rank mission. They had gone out to an outpost to pick up some reports, when they had stumbled across a whole encampment of bandits. They had responded perfectly, and they were able to subdue the bandits without a scratch. However, this was nothing compared to the trouble the other rookie teams had gotten into. Although she had originally been impressed by Asuma's story of the Kyumo missing Nin, Kakashi's story blew theirs out of the water. Of course it would be Team 7 to turn a D rank into an A rank. Well, it was only an A rank due to presence of the jounin. Even so, Kakashi's kids had been remarkable. Dealing with two IWA chunins all by themselves. Their accomplishments made her excited. Maybe it was a little immature, but the three Jounin were very competitive, and she wanted to see how well her kids stacked up against the other teams. She would have the perfect chance too. If they kept progressing the way they had, she was confident they would be ready for the Chunin exams. Kiba would need to work on his impulsiveness, but she was pretty confident in Shino and Sakura's abilities. She knew Asuma, and he was probably just as lax in teaching as Kakashi was. She couldn't help but feel a little smug if they were able to wipe the floor with their old classmates. It would certainly make her feel smug to wipe the grin off of Enko's face. While she was her best friend, she could be a bit overwhelming at times. For whatever reason, she was rooting for Kakashi's group of kids over hers. Just because she was sleeping with the guy didn't mean she had to side with him on everything. She had been adamant that they could, in her own words, curb stomp your cute little maggots into oblivion. This only motivated Kurenai further to make sure her kids went above and beyond Kakashi's students. She knew the man, and there was no way he was pushing them any harder than he had to. Again, Kakashi ordered. All three were panting as they stared up at the trees in front of them. They took a deep breath and all three of them rushed up the side of the tree. Sasuke and Naruto were able to make it up about 8 or 9 steps before they lost control. Hinata once again made it all the way up the tree and ran back down. She had already been taught this exercise years ago to help bolster her chakra control. The Juken was a style that required expert control of one's own chakra, and young Hyuga were drilled with these exercises from the moment they began training. The two boys grunted as they landed on their feet, while Hinata ran down the tree. Kakashi gave them a moment to catch their breath as he stared at them. Hinata had this down, he was now just making her do this to increase her reserves. Based on the techniques she had created, she would need a much larger chakra system in order to cope with their drawbacks. After that initial beatdown, he decided to take it a little more slowly. He was going to ease them into his planned schedule, but that initial spar would serve to show that he could change their pace at any time. Very good, Hinata. You'll be moving on to the next step as these two keep working on this. Both of the boys were frustrated as they glared up at the trees. They had yet to find the right balance and it was continuously throwing them off. With every failed attempt they would just grow angrier, causing them to fail over and over. Hi, sensei, Hinata panted, what is the next step? I'll demonstrate. You too. Pay attention for this. After you are done here, you will be moving on to this as well. Kakashi began going through hand signs before slamming his hands in the ground. Doton, moving earth core. A square in the dirt formed in front him, and it began to sink into the ground. He kept the jutsu going until there was a 40-square-foot hole in front. The others stared at the cube in the ground as Kakashi began running the more seals. Sushin, waterfall cascade. A large stream of water erupted from his mask and began to fill the hole. As the water level became even with the ground, he cut off the jutsu. This is the next step, calmly said as he strolled out onto the surface of the water. They could only stare in awe as their sensei shattered their view of the world. When he turned back to them, he couldn't help but chuckle. Oh, they were just so precious. After you have mastered tree walking, you can move on to water walking. I will go into detail of the technique with you boys after you have completed the first step, he said as he rejoined them at the pond's edge. For now, you to keep going at it until you have it mastered. You will not be moving on until I see fit. Now get back to it. Newly invigorated, the two boys raced off towards the tree as they tried their next attempt. Hinata, Kakashi called, drawing her attention away from the boys. I don't expect this to be too much trouble for you, but I expect you to apply yourself just as hard as they are. Yes, sir. Now, before we get started, I might want to recommend refraining from wearing white clothes over the next few days. I know you like your jacket and it is pretty heavy, but I don't think we need to give the boys any more ideas than necessary. Hinata was burning as red as a tomato, and Kakashi could swear he saw steam coming out of her ears. Kakashi-sensei. She whined as she tried to hide away into her jacket. He chuckled as he patted her head. I'm only teasing, but it wouldn't hurt to bring a towel to training either. She nodded her head as Naruto rang out, Hey, how come you are being so nice to her? Because she is actually doing a good job. Besides, Hinata-chan is my favorite. Kakashi smiled at the boy. Her face actually seemed to glow as she tried to bury herself deeper into her jacket. You're just saying that to be mean, Kakashi team. Naruto pouted as a shuriken sailed next to his face. Language Naruto. In fact, there was a reason Kakashi was going lighter on the girl. It was not because she was weaker. Well, not physically anyway. From what he had heard, negative reinforcement was not going to work on her as it might her teammates. They thrived in the face of a challenge. If the boys were told they couldn't do something, they would throw themselves at it until they had either accomplished it or they died trying. Her own clan had pushed her down for so many years, and all that did was drive her into her shell. She needed to be handled carefully. He couldn't let up on her too much, but she had to know that he thought she was doing a good job. A little praise could go a long way for someone deprived of it. Too much pressure and he could just make matters worse. Now, are you ready to get started? Why yes sir, she nodded as her face calmed down. Now the trick is to change the flow of your chakra with the flow of the water. Sasuke growled as he made another mark on the tree. This latest attempt was even further down than this last. He just couldn't get it. He glared daggers at the tree as he landed on his feet. What was it he was doing wrong? He could understand why Hinata could do it, but why was he having such a hard time? The dobe had been slowly creeping up on him and had passed his furthest point a while ago. He wasn't that far ahead, but it still irritated him to be overtaken by the blonde idiot. He sighed as he sat down to catch his breath. He shot a glare at Kakashi who was off to the side working on a scroll. His orange book had been suspiciously absent, and it was strange to see him without his nose buried in pages of smut. He was apparently writing out his plans for them over the next few weeks. Naruto landed with a thud next to him and immediately fell on his back. He was panting heavily, and frowned as he stared up at the tree. He was getting better, but he still felt like he was doing something wrong. He groaned as he sat up and stared out at the water. Hinata was standing in the middle of the pond with her eyes closed in deep concentration. Learning to stand on the water had been the easy part. Keeping her concentration and while moving forward was what eluded her grasp. He blushed when he realized her jacket had been tossed to the side long ago, for it was soaked and weighing her down. She stood in her mesh jacket as water dripped down her face from her hair due to her last attempt. It had been a long time since he had seen her without her jacket, and he had forgotten how slender she was. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath to clear her mind. She stretched her senses out and let her chakra mingle with the water. Though it appeared calm, she could feel the tiny ripples of its movements as it bounced against the shore. She let it up and down movement flow over her as she tentatively took a step forward. She maintained the rhythm of the water in her mind as she brought her foot down. There was a slight dip, but she adjusted her footing and took another step. Then another. And another. She was wobbling her way across the water and smiled. She was starting to get it. She opened her eyes to see the two boys staring at her and a blush began creeping up her face. This tiny distraction was all that was needed to break her concentration and she fell into the cold water. She shivered as swam up to shore and pulled herself out of the water. She desperately tried to avoid eye contact with the boys. Both were blushing as they tried to ignore her, wiping herself off with her jacket. Boys! Eyes front and center, Kakashi called out, Hinata, very good job. With a day or two, I'm sure you'll have it down. Take a break for now. The two boys' heads turned around so fast, she was worried they were going to have whiplash. She blushed and called out thank you, as she approached them and sat in the middle. Sasuke, is your nose feeling better? She asked. Still hurts, but thank you for writing it. Kakashi backhand earlier had nearly broken his nose. Kakashi had felt a little bad for that. He had made sure it was fully broken after they had their one-on-one bout, while Hinata helped Naruto out of his own seal. How are you two doing? Not as well as you, Naruto mumbled, I just can't seem to get it. Every time I fail, I just get more frustrated. Although Sasuke remained silent, his thoughts were the same as Naruto's. Well, and maybe that is the problem. They both stared at her as she got up and headed to the tree. What I was told to do was empty your mind as you attempt it. If you are upset or your mind is clouded, it can disrupt your chakra flow, causing you to fall. Why is that? Naruto asked as his face scrunched up. Because chakra isn't just some neutral energy source. It responds to our emotions. If we are angry or upset, chakra takes on those characteristics. It will flow wildly and leak from your system. This is what makes it harder to control. If you're calm, it will flow smoothly like water, making it much easier. Naruto smiled as he jumped to his feet. All right. Let's try it. He closed his eyes and began taking deep breaths. He stopped smiling, and she noticed he was going into the same frame of mind he went into when he was working on seals. He pushed away his thoughts of irritation and instead focused on the basic kanji for Fuinjutsu. Let go of your anger. Let go of your tension. His eyes snapped open and he raced towards the tree. As he raced up, his heart pounded as he neared his previous record, and he was delighted as he flew past it and kept on going. He went about 8 more steps and started getting excited before he began to overload the chakra in his feet and he slipped from the bark. He slashed the tree as he fell back towards the ground. The landed with a thud and slipped onto his back. Although it had hurt, he was ecstatic. Her advice had worked. As Hinata raced over to check that he was all right, he enveloped her in a big hug and started spinning her around. He seemed to have no problems as the drenched girl soaked his clothes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You're the best, Hinata-chan. Her eyes rolled into the back of her head as she became limp in his grasp. Sasuke stared at them as he fumed over her comments. Of course. It was so simple. It infuriated him, he hadn't thought of it before. The same train of thought applied to anything. The angrier you were, the harder it was to concentrate. The more analytical side of his mind was intrigued that it would apply to chakra as well. As he thought this over, a new thought burst into his head. Is that why he had said that? Was that his goal? He was instantly transported back to that night, as his brother stood of the fresh corpses of his mother and father. That night was forever burned into his memory. His brother had made sure of that. If you want to kill me, curse me, hate me, and live a long unsightly life. Was that why he had done it? So when they had their inevitable face-off, Sasuke would be so blinded by rage that his chakra and mind would be off balance. Had he really thought that far ahead? He clenched his fist as he stared up at the tree. I will not let my brother control my destiny anymore. He took a deep breath and thought of clouds to calm himself. His eyes shot open and he raced towards the tree full tilt. He soared past his previous mark and made several steps before the image of his brother's face came back into his mind. His concentration shattered and his chakra slipped from the tree trunk. He began falling and slammed his kunai into the bark to slow his descent. He jumped off and rolled to his feet before he stared at the tree. He had certainly surpassed his previous record, but it was nowhere good enough. So they are finally starting to get it, Kakashi mused. His teammates offered their words of encouragement, but Sasuke ignored them as he faced his latest problem. This was something that would directly affect his final battle with his brother and could potentially save him on the road to reach him. He needed to find a way to calm himself. As he thought this over, a new problem surprised him. What put him at ease? What were things that he actually liked to do? Chapter 16, Release the Hounds. Kakashi was pleased as he stared down at the exhausted forms of his little genin. Everyone was panting, and Sasuke especially had some nasty bruises forming. The boys were certainly coming along. In a day or two, he was certain that they would have the tree walking exercise mastered. Given her astounding control, he was sure Hinata would have water walking down around the same time. Hinata was draped in Kakashi's flak jacket and shivering due to the water clinging to her form. While it wouldn't cover her arms, it would certainly warm her back and chest. Konoha's specialized flak jackets were designed for use in every environment. They were light enough for use in the deserts of Suna, and they had heating pads activated by chakra for the cold, harsh winters of Iron Country. Now, I'm pleased with your efforts for day 1. In the morning, we'll start with another spar before practicing what we learned today. We'll go over the full details of your regiment tomorrow. I expect you all on time, or the punishment will be severe. All 3 shuddered as their injuries from this morning served as a painful reminder of how harsh Kakashi could be. Hinata, just bring the jacket with you tomorrow morning, and remember to bring a towel. You guys are dismissed. With that, he disappeared in a swirl of leaves. When he was sure the man was gone, Naruto scrunched his face. I bet he thinks he's so cool when he does that. Baka-sensei. The 3 groaned as they started to shuffle their way back towards the village. Sasuke winced with every step he took. He wanted to complain, but this is what he had wanted. His sensei was finally getting serious about their training. However, he thought as he rubbed his nose, I just wish he could be a little gentler about it. As Naruto started to whine to Hinata about Kakashi's supposed favoritism, Sasuke's thoughts returned to the question that had hounded him as he tried again and again to climb up the tree. What did he like to do? What put him at ease? As he had made it clear in his introduction, Sasuke didn't like many things. He never really interacted with his fellow classmates when he had been in the academy and he didn't really have any hobbies. If he sat around, he would end up thinking about his family. If he tired himself out training, he only delayed the inevitable. He clenched his fist and scowled. Even after 5 years, his brother was still controlling his life. Hinata had noticed Sasuke's change in temperament as the west entrance to the village came into view. She reached out and tugged at his arm, forcing him to look at her. "Are you all right?" "Fine," he muttered as he tried to remove his arm from her grasp, but she would not let go. "Please tell me what's wrong," she pleaded. "I said I'm fine." He yanked his arm from her grasp, and without another word, he started heading off towards his apartment. Naruto crossed his arms and stared at Sasuke's retreating form. Stupid team. That was rude. Why does he always have to act like something crawled up his ass? "I'm sorry, Hinata-chan. You didn't deserve that." She was silent and rubbed her fingers. "It's alright. I'm still worried something is bothering him," she sighed as she stared off in the direction he had left. Naruto was silent as he reflected on his conversation with Kenta-san. He was reminded how little he actually knew about Sasuke. He had let his pride prevent him from reaching out to him for years. Maybe it was time that he finally did something. "I think we should have a talk with him," Hinata said. "I'm open to it, but I don't think he's going to open up without some resistance. He's as thick-headed as I am." She lightly chuckled at his attempt to cheer her up, as she reached out and lightly tapped his head with her knuckle. "You certainly are that. You two can both be so silly." Naruto chuckled as he rubbed his head. "Okay, if we run into him before training, we'll try to talk to him then." "Sounds good." "Hi, great. Now let's get you home before you catch a cold. Can't have the village's greatest mednin in training falling sick on me." As it turned out, they didn't run into Sasuke the next morning. In fact, he did not arrive until a minute before Kakashi appeared. Hinata was quick to return his neatly folded and washed flak jacket. "Thank you, Hinata," he smiled as he threw on the jacket. "Alright, now gather round and listen up." They were hesitant. Apparently their lesson from yesterday was still fresh in their mind. "Good. You're not going to sucker punch me again, are you?" Naruto asked. "Only if you let me," Kakashi replied with a smile. "It was a cheap shot. There are no cheap shots in our line of work. Now circle up and listen. Here's how things are going to work. Every morning we will begin with a Taijitsu Spar similar to the one you had yesterday. You will have to work together to fend me off for 30 minutes using every trick in your arsenal. This will force you to come up with new tactics every day. You did well yesterday, but you are going to have to keep up that momentum. After that we will take a 20-minute breather. I'd advise skipping breakfast and eating during this period instead. When that is done, we will move on to individual lessons, where I will take time with each of you." Everyone's eyes lit up at that prospect. "However, we will not begin this until all of you have mastered the water walking exercise. Think of it as a little extra incentive to work harder. After a few hours, we will begin group conditioning, which I'm certain you will enjoy." His pleasant voice sent shivers down their spines. "After that, we'll break again for food and return an hour later. You can go into the village if you want, but anyone who is late will lose their personal time the next day and instead use their time doing what we in ANBU called suicide sets. Trust me. They are quite unpleasant." The color drained from their faces, as each of them understood the gravity of such punishment. All hopes of sneaking off to Ichiraku were dashed out of Naruto's mind. Kakashi continued, "After the meal, we will have one-on-one spars before calling it a night. This schedule can change in any way I see fit, but this is the base form we will follow. We will meet every day except Sunday, which will be used to relax. Any strenuous activity is forbidden. The amount of effort your muscles will be going through will require a day to release and heal, and if I find out you ignored my warnings, looking at you boys, that just means I'm not working you hard enough. Am I understood?" The group nodded in unison and he smiled. "Good. Any questions?" A unison headshake was his response. "Very well. By the way, Sasuke, how is your face feeling?" "Better, no thanks to you," he grumbled as he rubbed his nose. "Really?" He smiled before he swung an uppercut straight to his chin, sending him flying back. "I'll have to fix that." Sasuke slammed into the ground and felt as if his body had been paralyzed. He couldn't move. Naruto and Hinata jumped back and took positions in front of their fallen teammate. Their legs were shaking as Kakashi slowly walked towards them, cracking his knuckles. Team Tactics Lesson 32, Protecting an Injured Comrade. Let's begin. 20 painful minutes later, a black blur paused and stared out over the field. He had been heading west anyway, but Kitsune took a moment to watch as Kakashi beat into his new team. Kitsune was described by his peers as cold and reserved, so it always shocked them whenever he made a snide remark to infuriate the blonde blur that would race into the Hokage's office from time to time. He let out a dark chuckle as Kakashi ripped through a line of clones and nailed the blonde in the gut. Maybe he really was the sadist his fellow ANBU members said he was. As Kakashi held off Sasuke, who had recovered by this point, he noticed their silent observer in the trees. He quickly grabbed Sasuke's leg mid-swing and Naruto's face, who had been creeping up behind him, and launched them at their third teammate, who was still recovering from a nasty blow to the side. He used the distraction of their collision to start signing to his longtime ANBU subordinate. Kitsune responded to his greetings and signed to him, "Graveyard Mission." Kakashi signed back, "Good hunting," before returning his attention to his three students who were starting to get back up. Naruto growled as he and his teammates starred daggers at the Jounin. Kitsune chuckled one last time before he continued on his path out of the village. He had been assigned another graveyard mission and every second counted. ANBU had dubbed this moniker to missions that were considered dormant or dead. Due to a lack of evidence, some missions were never solved and remained open for years. However, sometimes the Hokage saw fit to take another crack at these cases by diverting some of his finest agents to take a look at the case from another perspective. His current mission regarded a 3-year-old case many had given up on and considered unfortunate circumstance. While his expertise mainly lay in combat, he was also one of ANBU's leading investigators and forensic specialists. Due to his special skills in tracking and fierce determination, the Hokage went out of his way to send his loyal hellhound on what many considered unsolvable cases. He hadn't disappointed him yet. He had been assigned 8 graveyard cases over the 14 years he had served in ANBU. Some took him only months, others took years. They were a heavy commitment, but he would always take the time to ensure each case had a resolution. This one would be no different. He continued his silent journey as he raced off towards the boundaries of fire and rain country. Hours later, Sasuke and Naruto raced up the trees once again and again, slowly improving on their previous records. Hinata was out on the man-made pond taking careful steps over the water. To avoid the same problems as yesterday, she had been sure to bring a bathing suit with her this time. Nothing fancy. Just a modest one-piece that matched the color of her hair. Her clothes and a towel were neatly folded off to the side. Kakashi glanced at his watch. They were making good time. Thanks to her advice the previous day, the boys were really making steady progress. It surprised him that Naruto seemed to find his center of peace easier than Sasuke. Then again, the boy had always been an oxymoron, loud and impulsive, yet breezed through the most difficult shinobi art like copy paper. He chalked it up to his Uzumaki heritage. He counted down the last seconds before he called out for them to stop. He was glad this had not drained too much from them. Sasuke was only lightly panting, and Hinata also seemed slightly winded while she dried her hair. Of course, Naruto was still bouncing full of energy. He would have to fix that. Alright. Good work, team. If you keep at this pace, I expect you boys will have this down by tomorrow. With Hinata's help, I'm sure you'll have water walking down in no time. Hinata blushed at the compliment and the boys looked excited. Kakashi definitely was impressed. He was especially surprised by Naruto's performance. He had initially been very worried about how he would handle the boys' chakra control. To put it in perspective, his own chakra reserves were like a small lake, but Naruto's were comparable to an ocean. That much built-up chakra had certainly caused him grief during his time at the academy. Studying Fuinjutsu had done wonders for him. While his control was nowhere near his teammates', it was acceptable for now. Now then, after Hinata has changed, we will begin our group conditioning. When he saw them seize up he said, "Don't worry. It won't be too bad on the first day. Just a simple jog around the village." They each let out a sigh, and Kakashi had a hard time stopping himself from chuckling. Oh, they have no idea. Throwing around ninjutsu, and in your case Fuinjutsu, can only get you so far. In some cases, pure taijitsu can be enough to overshadow both of these. It doesn't matter how powerful your jutsu is if you can't hit your opponent. He knew this was a lesson Naruto had already taken to heart, which reminded him of something he had been meaning to bring up to the blonde. Hinata went off to change behind the trees, and Kakashi was about to call Naruto over, when the blonde stormed over to the other boy. "You should apologize to Hinata-chan for last night," he said as he glared at him. "What for? You were rude to her. She was just trying to make sure you were okay." You didn't need to snap at her. Why don't you mind your own business? He snapped. Because my friends are my business. So stop being such a jerk and apologize when she gets back. After a moment of silence he uttered, fine. He sighed before continuing, you're right. I may have snapped at her. I just had a lot on my mind. Do you want to talk about it? No, he glared at him. Want to talk about it with me? No, boys. If you're done, I'd like to see you for a moment, Kakashi cut in. They stopped their bickering and walked up to Kakashi. He was glad they were able to work things out without Hinata intervening. They needed to be able to defuse a situation without her presence. Better. Now Naruto, what can you tell me about your so-called lightning rod seals? How did you hear about that? I read about it in your exam reports. I heard about how you stole the show with your performance. Irika was especially vocal about your performance. Naruto lightly blushed as he excitedly started rambling away about the complexities of drawing the electric field, creating an abundance of protons to attract the electricity, and more technical physics jargon that went way over Sasuke's head. How hard would it be for you to make more of them? They take a bit of time, but they aren't too complicated. I can make some more if you really need them. I'll admit your idea seems very useful, especially since my primary affinity is lightning. Naruto's eyes widened as a grin split apart his face. You got it, sensei. Oh, this is so awesome. I get to see some field tests firsthand. I got to make sure I'm ready for. He continued muttering to himself, as Sasuke slowly edged towards Kakashi. He leaned in and whispered, he doesn't consider that complicated. I was just as lost as you were, Kakashi whispered back. Something clicked in his head, and Sasuke asked, how does one find out their chakra affinity? Now. We'll get to that in due time. The test itself is extremely simple and barely takes a second, but it's not time to start elemental training. Actually Kakashi-sensei, I was curious too, Naruto butted in, why does your chakra affinity matter anyway? Gigi can throw around any element he wants. Well, your chakra affinity doesn't really limit the type of jutsu you can perform, but it does affect how strong each can be. You'll find that it's easier to learn and master jutsu of your own chakra nature than with others. Some people prefer to stick with the type they are strongest with, but I find this foolish. Limiting yourself to one type hurts your ability to adapt and allows your opponent to prey on your element's weakness. Now elemental training is something that we won't deal with until you're Chunin. It mostly involves gaining a better understanding of your element and helping you develop your own jutsu. The boys nodded as Hinata jogged up fully changed. I'm Hinata. She turned to him and was surprised, when he refused to make eye contact. He mumbled something under his breath so softly she could barely hear him. What was that, Sasuke? He took a deep breath and looked at her and said, I'm sorry. She was surprised and opened her mouth to ask a question, but he continued, I apologize for my behavior last night. I shouldn't have snapped at you. I just had something on my mind. Hinata smiled as she stared at him. She slightly bowed and said, I appreciate that, Sasuke-kun. I forgive you. Kakashi smiled at his team. Glad everything worked out. Alright, before we begin, there are some people I'd like you to meet. He pulled out a kunai and made a cut along his finger. Hinata gasped, but he pressed on and pulled out a scroll from his jacket. Forming 4 hand signs, he slammed his hand into the ground, eliciting a cloud of white smoke. The smoke cleared to reveal Kakashi in the midst of a group of dogs with blue bandanas. Team, I'd like you to meet my Ninken. They've been very excited to meet you. The dogs raced forward and enveloped Hinata. She giggled as they jumped up to lick her face. She reached down and picked up a small brown pug. Look at you. You're so cute. You have such lovely, straight fur. And your paws, they are so soft. Thank you, miss. Not many people understand how hard it is to keep my fur this clean. Although I would prefer it if you didn't call me cute, I apologize, Inu-san. I will refrain from calling you that in the future. The pug smiled as Hinata enveloped it in another hug. I didn't know you had a summoning contract, Sasuke said as he reached down for the dogs to sniff his hand. I don't, Kakashi replied, they are just linked to a summoning jutsu through the mark on their bandanas. Besides tracking, what else can they do? Sasuke asked as Shiba rubbed his face into Sasuke's hand. Sasuke had surprisingly always done well with animals. More than you can, catboy, the pug uttered as it focused its blank look on him. Now be nice, Pakken. Team, let me introduce Pakken, Bull, Urushi, Shiba, Biscuit, Akino, Uhei, and Guruko. I've trained them since I was a little older than you. They can speak, are expert trackers, and have saved my hide on more missions than I can count, Kakashi stated proudly. That is so cool. Hey little buddy, Naruto said, reaching out before Bull started growling at him. Whoa, wayo. What did I do? He asked as he stepped back. Bull, was that necessary? Kakashi chided. He smells, was all Bull replied. Hey! What's that supposed to mean? Exploded Naruto. Maybe he's just calling it as it is, Sasuke butted in. Shut up. I showered before I came here. We haven't been sweating that badly. He reeks of fox, Bull said bluntly as he stared into Naruto's eyes. So you all already know about summoning? Kakashi cut in before the conversation could head down an uncomfortable direction. Naruto was thankful for the save and started petting the much more approachable Biscuit. Sasuke nodded as he scratched Shiba behind the ears. My clan used to have strong connections with the cats. There was never a formal contract scroll, but we had a strong trade alliance. They would supply weapons for us, and sometimes allow us to summon them in a similar manner you do. My clan also has a summoning scroll, but not many people are allowed to sign it. While they are loyal to the clan, the summons are very picky about who they choose, Hinata piped in. Really? Kakashi was surprised. He had never heard of the Hyuga owning a summoning contract. How long have they had it? How many people in the clan are currently allowed to use the scroll? Or is that too private? No sir, she seemed to look down and shuffle her feet as she continued. There's only one person allowed to use it. Is it your father? She violently shook her head as a blush started to form. And no, that surprised him. The summons were so choosy they wouldn't even let the hierarch call them. Can you tell me who it is? Her blush darkened as she stuttered, it's me. Really no. Kakashi said lightly surprised, as the boys stared at her. She gripped Pakken closer to her chest in an attempt to hide her face. Naruto raced up to her and exclaimed, wow! You can summon too. That's so awesome Hinata-chan. What kind of animal is it? Can you show us? Can you do it right now? Why kind of jutsu does it know? Naruto continued to rapid-fire questions at her, and her blush only grew darker and darker. Naruto, please give Hinata some space. I'd rather she didn't use up her chakra attempting to summon, when we are about to start your conditioning. There is always later. Hinata sent him a look of thanks as she set Pakken back on the ground. Sasuke was about to speak up when Kakashi loudly whistled and his dogs raced over and sat down alongside him. They were instantly alert as Kakashi raised a fist, and all of the dogs started growling at them. What's going? They are here to help motivate you three today. Guys, whoever catches one of them first gets Angus steak tonight and an extra serving of peanut butter on the side. The dogs seemed to smile as they menacingly bared their teeth at the genin. You wouldn't really let them harm us, right, sensei? Naruto attempted to chuckle. I don't know. Do you really want to find out? They'll stop only when I say so. By the way, thank you so much for allowing them to get your sense earlier. They each paled as they realized they had been duped. I think a 10-second head start is fair enough, Kakashi said, and they each disappeared in a cloud of smoke. I think that's too generous, Kakashi, Pakken said. You're right. 5 should be enough. Sick M. Akamaru stopped sniffing at the grass and stared off into the trees. What's up, buddy? Kiba asked. Akamaru started growling and barking towards the woods. Kiba, what's going on? Kurenai asked. Not sure. Something's got him riled up. I don't know what he paused as he sniffed the air. He smelled it too. They all started to hear faint screaming, which was rapidly growing louder and louder. They stared in the direction Akamaru was pointing in as they started to see forms in the woods. What is? Kurenai was cut off as Team 7 burst through the trees sprinting right towards them. Naruto was leading the pack screaming his head off as they raced towards them. What was going on? Excuse me. Pardon me. Coming through. Gotta go, Naruto rambled off. He dashed through teammate. Hinata, what is going on? Sorry sensei, no time, Hinata shouted as she and Sasuke raced past them as well. What is going on? Sakura asked as several forms crashed through the tree line. She lost her breath as 8 dogs were charging straight at them. She began to reach for a kunai, when they shifted around them and stormed off after Team 7. They all stood there in a daze as they tried to comprehend what they had just seen. What the hell was that? Kiba exclaimed. After a moment of silence, Kurenai softly said, "It appears Kakashi is having fun with his students." Team 8 blinked at her as they stared off where Team 7 had left. What kind of sadistic sensei did they have? Naruto led the charge as the three of them sprinted through the streets of town. They weaved their way through the streets with the pack right on their heels. They jumped over, and in some cases, through caravans and wagons, as they made their way through the city. "Right turn, now!" Naruto yelled and the other two followed him without a second thought. Hinata's stomach lurched as she turned into the alley and saw it was a dead end. Naruto raced ahead, slid while turning around, and crossed his fingers together. Sasuke raced past her and planted his feet in Naruto's hands. He heaved up and sent Sasuke flying into the air. After a few seconds, Sasuke planted his feet against the wall and started running up the side. He started slowing down as he reached the top and jumped just in time to grab hold of the roof's edge. Hinata caught on and raced towards him as she started to hear the barking drawing closer. He catapulted her up and she easily adhered to the wall, making it to the top without a problem. They both stared down at Naruto, who was now facing down the pack hurtling straight towards him. He crossed his fingers together and 3 clones appeared. The first 2 grabbed hold of the other's arms and flung them up in the air. The original twisted and kicked off from his clone's feet and propelled himself up the wall. He hit the ground running and the other 2 caught him when he started to slip near the roof. They took the moment to take a breath and stared down at the dogs below. They tore into the blonde's clones and he winced as the feeling of their sharp fangs entered his mind. "At least we'll be safe up here," Naruto sighed. A second later, Shiba and Uhei started racing up the wall towards them. "You had to jinx it, didn't you?" Sasuke growled as they turned to continue their pursuit on the rooftops. It must have been a funny sight. Seeing 3 12-year-olds jumping and racing along the rooftops as a horde of dogs chased after them. They pushed more chakra through their legs when they had to bridge large gaps. When they tried to cross the street, Naruto would summon a tower of clones on each other's shoulders, allowing them to get across. "This is getting ridiculous," Sasuke growled as he reached into his pouch for some wire. The pack was temporarily out of sight. They had jumped down to the streets below before heading up the walls to rejoin them on the roofs. "Normally I'd suggest splitting up, but I don't see how that would do us much good," Naruto panted. "We seem to be doing better working together." He summoned 5 clones and Sasuke tossed 2 of them his trap. They began setting it up as the other 3 helped propel the team over a slightly large gap. "Here they come," Hinata warned as she watched them with her Byakugan. The dogs raced after them, setting off the trip wire, causing the 2 in the lead to be caught by their legs. The rest of the pack pounced and destroyed the lingering clones before Bull came up and easily snapped the wire. Sasuke cursed that he couldn't use any of his jutsu. They were predominantly fire, and it would be hazardous to discharge them in a civilian environment. Even then, he doubted it would stop them and it would only drain at his energy. "Well, right now I'm open to suggestions, cause we don't seem to be slowing them down that much." Sasuke glanced back. They had been only slightly set back and were easily making up their lost ground. "I may have an idea," Hinata piped in, "but it may leave us in worse condition than before." "I'm all ears." "We could use Naruto-kun's technique to teleport away from them, but even if we hid, they can still track us. It would also leave Naruto-kun extremely sick, which would slow us down tremendously. I've never tried transporting 2 people at once. I'd never even tried it with someone else before Hinata-chan on our mission. But could you manage it?" Sasuke cut in. Naruto flashed him a look of determination. "If you guys need me to, I'll make it work." "Alright, here's what we'll do." Pakken led the charge as they soared after the team. They had been at this for a couple hours now. Sooner or later, they would start to get tired. His eyes sharpened as the blonde brought his hands together to summon more clones. He was shocked as around 100 of them burst out of the cloud of smoke. The Ninken were immediately on edge, but were surprised when they all went away from them. They each dashed off into the village in different directions. "Are we sure they didn't switch with a clone?" Akino asked. Pakken sniffed the air and stared at the kids ahead of him. "Nope. That's still them. I don't know what they are up to, but get ready for anything." They team started leading them towards the edge of the village, and before they knew it, they were racing out the front gate. The Chunin on guard had yelled at them as they passed, but they paid him no mind. They raced off into the woods, and Pakken was growing more and more suspicious. Just what did they think they were up to? Finally, they stopped and turned towards the pack. Pakken barked once and they all came to a halt. What did they think they were doing? They were panting heavily as they stared at the dogs 10 feet away from them. Naruto flashed them a grin as he reached into his bag. It's been a blast, guys, but we'll see you later. Hinata and Sasuke grabbed hold of his shoulders, and all three disappeared in a flash of light. The dogs simply stared at the lingering glimmer. So he actually did it, Pakken thought. The kid really learned the Hiration. Still, he knew that the blonde would need a marker, which meant it would have to be somewhere along the way they had came. Then the realization hit him. That storm of clones had been a distraction for a single clone to get away with the marker. There was no way of telling which direction he could have gone. Pakken would have chuckled if he wasn't so frustrated. The kids weren't the only ones who were tired. He turned back to the pack and said, "All right. We have a lot of ground to cover. We're splitting up to find them. They have to be somewhere in the village. We had better start looking." A single clone stood in the middle of the woods holding the three-pronged kunai as he waited for the return of the original. There was a bright flash and suddenly all three genin materialized before him. Sasuke staggered as he tried to orient himself. The clone reached out and helped the blonde as he fell on his hands and knees and began violently throwing up. Hinata rubbed his back as he repeatedly regurgitated his stomach. When she started to notice blood mixed in, she began to worry. Finally, his convulsions stopped, and he began to breathe normally. "Are you okay?" "No. No, 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 no." "That was the worst it has ever been," Naruto uttered as he clenched the grass in his fists. He was shaking as Hinata helped him up. Naruto turned to his clone and tried to offer him a smile. "Thanks me. Anytime, boss," he smirked before he puffed away. Hinata started to carry him, and was surprised when Sasuke grabbed his other arm. He didn't say anything and the three of them started heading off through the woods. After a while, Sasuke turned to him and smirked. "Like I said before, Dobe. It's a little creepy to talk to yourself. Especially when something talks back." "Shut up," he muttered weakly. He felt as if a hole had been torn in his stomach. He felt his body heating up as the pain started to ever so slowly edge away. "Naruto, these effects can't be normal. You need to see a doctor about this," Hinata chimed in. "Nah, I'll be right as rain in a few hours. I just don't know what the problem is, Hinata-chan." She wanted to press the issue but Sasuke cut in. "Where the hell did you even learn that jutsu in the first place?" Sasuke asked. Even through his exhaustion, Naruto was still anxious about revealing the origin of his secret technique. "Why do you want to know?" "I'm just curious. That's a complicated technique, and I'm certain the fourth Hokage didn't come back from the dead to teach you." Naruto was stunned as he and Hinata stared at Sasuke. He was silent before he asked, "How long have you known?" "It came to me after I was thinking about our last mission. Wasn't that hard to put two and two together?" The yellow flash really gives it away. "Sorry for not talking about it." "Don't be. I didn't bring it up to you, so there is no reason for you to feel sorry. The only thing you need to worry about is fixing that damn problem. Honestly, you'd be strongest genin in the village if you could fix that shit out." "I would be." He smirked up at him. "Not there yet, Seal Master. You might be faster than me, but you're still not quite at my level." Sasuke smirked at him. Naruto was surprised before smiling, and they continued on at steady pace. They had done it. They had gotten away, and they were probably going to stay hidden for the rest of the day. They knew that the dogs could easily sniff them out if they stayed in the village. So there are only a few spots they could go. They had to go somewhere the pack wouldn't expect and that already had their scent. He almost smiled as they entered the clearing of Training Ground 7. They meandered their way over to the training posts as lay Naruto against the training posts. They found themselves taking spots sitting right next to him. Naruto closed his eyes and smiled. "I don't think we need to worry about them for a while." "What did I tell you about jinxing us?" Sasuke lightly reprimanded. "Come on. A true ninja never believes in superstitions," he chuckled. Coming from the guy scared of ghosts, he smirked back. If he hadn't been so tired, he would have jumped up. I don't know what you're talking about," he exclaimed. Hinata lightly giggled and Sasuke smirked as he closed his eyes and leaned against the pole. A pleasant quietness fell over them, as they each got comfortable against the pole. They leaned against him, and the warmth from their bodies filled him with a feeling he hadn't really felt before. Soon enough, they started to drift to sleep one by one. Although he was the most tired, Naruto was the last one to kneel to slumber. Before he drifted off, He glanced between the people leaning against his sides. His eyes fluttered and he had one last thought before sleep claimed him. If this feeling was what being on a team was like. This feeling of belonging. It was more than he had ever hoped for. Kakashi watched from the trees as the final head bobbed down. He made 4 hand seals and lightly pressed the ground, revealing Pakken. Kakashi? What's up? We were in the middle of the search. I can see that, he said as he pointed at the sleeping genin. Oh, he whispered as he spied them, I'd rather not disturb them. Neither would I. They have done some good work in the last few days. They deserve a break. Tell the others to call off their search. I think they are done for the day. You really care for these kids. You can be so soft, Kakashi. Maybe. Alright then, I'll tell them, but before I go dash. He trotted out into the field towards the sleeping genin. He quietly crept up and lightly gnawed on Naruto's sandal, before triumphantly trotting back to Kakashi. He smugly looked at Kakashi and said, now I get the steak for dinner. Kakashi chuckled and scratched behind his ears, I guess you do. Get going. I'll see you at home. Pakken nodded and set out as Kakashi stared at his team enjoying a blissful sleep. Sensei would have been proud. Chapter 17, Private Sessions. 3 years ago. Ria. Ria, where are you? A woman's voice cried out, echoing over the rolling hills of tall grass. Her eyes danced frantically across the horizon, until a small head perked up over the grass. Relief flooded the woman's chest as she ran over and grasped the little girl in her arms. There you are. What have I told you about going off on your own? Her mother chided. The little girl seemed embarrassed as she clutched a small toy bear to her chest. Her little expedition had been cut off far too soon in her opinion. The ever-oppressive rain had finally let off for a few minutes, and she wanted to make the most of it. She was tired of being in that tiny wagon for so long. She wanted to spread her legs and play. She mumbled something under her breath, causing her mother to pull back. What was that, sweetie? She gently prodded. I don't like it here. How much longer until we get to leave this place? Her mother gave her a sad smile as she brushed a stray hair from Ria's forehead. It came to no surprise to her that the kids were feeling pent up inside the carriage. They had been traveling for 3 weeks now, the last 2 of which were spent under the oppressive weather of rain country. Hey, I know it's been hard for you and your brothers. I'm sure this trip hasn't exactly been fun for you all, but I promise that the worst is almost behind us. We're almost to the land of rivers, and then we'll be out of this nasty rain. It will probably just be about 3 more days of travel. This didn't seem to satisfy the pouting young girl, who only seemed to focus on the more travel part. She stubbornly clutched the teddy bear closer to her chest and avoided her mother's eyes. Come on, the mother smiled sweetly as she gently lifted her daughter's chin up to look her in the eyes. I need your help to keep your brothers in good spirits too. I'm sure they're feeling the exact same way as you, so let's try to do something together to lift everyone's spirits. What do you say? The little girl kept her tight grip on her toy, but she eventually nodded and said, okay. I'm sorry for running off without telling you. It's okay, sweetie, now come along. The rain could start up any minute and we don't want you catching a cold, she replied as she offered her hand. The little girl nodded and the 2 of them began heading back to the caravan. They had been traveling for weeks now, and while the mother was glad that her daughter had a chance to stretch her legs, it was also very dangerous for her to go off on her own. Mommy, where exactly are we going? Her mother tightened her grip on her daughter's hand as she smiled down at her. We are going to visit some very special people who your father haven't seen in a long time. He's very excited to introduce you to them. Who are they? Ria responded, voice brimming with curiosity. This was the first time her mother had actually budged when she asked about their surprise trip. Well, that's part of the surprise, but rest assured they are going to more than thrilled to meet why. She was cut off as a ball of fire erupted from the campsite in the distance. Ria let out a shrill scream as her mother's calm and collected face shifted into one completely on guard. Mommy, what's going on? Ria frantically asked, tugging on her mother's arm. Her mother made no reply, as her eyes scanned the area around her. Suddenly, the woman scooped up her daughter so fast that she dropped her stuffed animal. Teddy! The little girl screamed as she grasped towards her dropped toy. Honey, I need you to be quiet. It is very important, but... Not another word. The little girl was immediately silent as her mother shot her a look she had never seen before. Her mother raced off towards the campsite, and the little girl started to tear up as her precious companion was left behind in the mud. In the tall grass, several eyes stared at their retreating forms and began swiftly following them. One set, however, did not give chase. The last person casually walked forward and stared down at the mud-caked form of the stuffed animal. Raising his fingers in a hand sign, the world melted away, revealing Kitsune standing in front of a pile of mud. He pocketed the wooden totem in his hand as he reached into the mud too and pulled out an object. He delicately tried to scrape away the mud and grime and let the rain wash away the years of accumulated filth to reveal a pair of glass eyes staring back at him. To think it had sat there for 3 years waiting for its master's return. The thing was so tattered, it was surprising the thing hadn't fallen apart. He was silent as he stored away the tiny creature into the sealing scroll on his forearm. This was his first stop on his mission. He gazed along the barren fields of rain country as his eyes settled on a dark silhouette in the distance. He raced over and found the charred remains of a wagon. The vehicle was half submerged in mud and covered in moss. The wheels were broken and there were several holes torn through the drenched canvas. He looked inside the wreckage and gazed upon what was left of the vehicle. Any documents or luggage that had been aboard had long been scavenged by the occupants of the area. All that was left was a lone body lying against the canvas. Kitsune stepped forward and yanked the kunai lodged deep into the man's skull. He assumed it was a man, based on the skeleton's build and clothes. After a quick prayer, Kitsune was sure to seal away the man's remains as well. His master had always taught him to respect the dead of innocent civilians, and offer a short prayer when possible. After 20 minutes, he was comfortable he had found everything he could at this location. Any evidence in the terrain such as explosion residue was certain to have been washed away by the weather. Taking one last glance to ensure he was alone, he pulled out his wooden totem and began reforming the jutsu. The world seemed to contort as Kitsune stood in the middle of a raging battling ground as steel clashed and shinobi were locked in combat. The wagon was upright again and he watched as a kunai peppered the canvas, and he heard a gurgled gasp come from inside. His eyes settled on the woman from before as she drove a kunai through the throat of an approaching man. Kitsune was frustrated that he could not recognize the headband from this point of view. The body flopped to the ground and the young girl whimpered at the sight, as she clutched her mother's leg. "Fisuchi!" A man's voice rang out. A larger-built man ran up to them and embraced who he assumed was his wife in a short hug, before he swept up the young girl in his arms. "Are you two all right?" "Yes, we're fine." "What about the boys?" "Raitsu has them." "Come on, my men will hold them off." "We need to leave." The two raced away as more dark forms converged on the scene and chased after them. Some were intercepted by the father's men, but some managed to break through. Kitsune creased his brow as the vision blurred and became dark. He released his jutsu and cursed. He supposed a child's memory could only remember so much. He stared off in the direction they had left and pocketed his totem. Without another word, he set off in the direction of the land of rivers. Kakashi stared out across the water as Hinata helped the two boys struggle to keep their balance. It had been several days, but they had finally managed to do it. All three of them were able to stay afloat on the water by themselves. Sure, the boys didn't have it down perfectly, but he had given them enough time on this. It was time to move forward. "All right, bring it in." The three wobbled their way across the water and met him on shore. Hinata was still blushing up a storm at the sight of the shirtless boys. They had followed her example and started showing up for practice with bathing suits for the exercise, and it was all she could do to not form a nosebleed. After all of the hard work Kakashi had been putting them through, the boys were certainly well developed for their age. "Great job. For now, I think that will be enough. You have each demonstrated that you are capable of the exercise, so you have earned the right to move on to your individual lessons." Each of them gleamed and smiled at the prospect. Each of them was excited to actually get personal training from their teacher. After all, they had seen what he was capable of when he took down a jounin in one move. After they had changed and returned to him, Kakashi crossed his fingers and two clones sprung to life next to him. "All right. Each of these clones will be helping you with your routine today. Try not to pop them, for I don't have enough chakra to keep sending them out if you do." The two clones directed Sasuke and Hinata away as the original stared down at Naruto, who was bouncing on his feet. "So what are we going to do, sensei? What badass techniques are we going to work on?" His mind swirled with image of himself shooting off tendrils of lightning, with one foot planted on the backside of Sasuke. "None. What?" He sputtered as he face-planted. What did you say? You heard me. I am not going to be teaching you some badass techniques, as you phrased it, at least not yet anyway. Instead, we are going to be forced to do some remedial work. He hardened his gaze as he stared at the boy. I'm sure Sasuke and Irika have pointed it out to you. You may be fast, but that doesn't make up for the fact that you are severely lacking in the Taijitsu department. Naruto clenched his teeth as he stared at the ground. It wasn't like it was his fault. I know that some of the teachers in the academy were less than helpful when it came to your education, but there is nothing we can do about that now. All we can do is fix up what they failed to teach you and press ahead. Naruto clenched his fist as he stared at the ground. Bastards teachers. Because of them, he was now going to be behind of Hinata and Sasuke team. Just because of their stupid prejudice. Now don't look so down. I didn't say that was all we'd be doing, as he noticed Naruto's dark change in attitude. Naruto looked up at him curiously as he continued, thankfully for you, your little incident with Mizuku and the Nidame's scroll turned out to be a blessing in disguise in more ways than one. Tell me, have you noticed the little trick with your shadow clones grant you? Naruto only stared at him blankly. I guess not, Kakashi sighed. Have you noticed how their memories seem to transfer back to you after they dispel? Feelings of the sharp teeth sinking into his race back into his mind. Oh yeah. Like when your rabid mutts were chasing us. Or when you passed out from exhaustion from working all day at the lumber yard, Kakashi finished. Everything your clones do will be sent back to you, exhaustion included. This is helpful for us, since we can cover a lot of ground at once, by having them practice with you. Meaning I get more training done at once. Naruto realized as his eyes lit up. Wow, sensei. You're some kind of genius. I have been called that from time to time, he chuckled. Anyways, like I said, your taijitsu is not all we will be working on. While I did pick up a thing or two from my sensei, I will admit that you are further along with sealing than I probably will ever be. I understand you are just starting your advanced series, correct? After he gave him a proud nod, he continued, while we are working on your training, I want you to leave a clone dedicated to reading through the advanced set. I know I haven't given you guys a lot of free time lately, and don't think I haven't noticed how tired you are in the morning. You've been staying up after training reading, haven't you? Knowing he had been caught, Naruto rubbed his head in embarrassment. I don't think I need to tell you that you need as much sleep as you can get. From now on, only read during our individual sessions and Sundays. I know your education is important to you, but you need to stay healthy or your exhaustion will catch up with you. Naruto nodded furiously as he understood the message. Moving on. Aside from that, we will work on getting the jutsu already under your belt to the next level. I assume the Fox Hellfire Jutsu was not the only technique Kitsune taught you, correct? After a nod, Kakashi started smiling. Good. Then show me. At the same time, the clone Kakashi stared down at Sasuke. Out of the three of them, he was the most anxious to learn. What troubled Kakashi was just how anxious he was. He wanted to progress quickly, but would get frustrated if anything took a long time to learn. He needed to focus on curbing that ego, but that could also backfire on him. He needed to find a nice medium of challenge. So, he reached into the bag he had brought and tossed Sasuke a Bakken. Sasuke rubbed his hand along the wooden blade as he shot Kakashi a surprised look. Kenjutsu. I'll admit your abilities in ninjutsu and taijitsu are already at Chunin level. Once you activate your Sharingan, it will be all the more easier for you to advance faster. You'll be able to copy any jutsu and most taijitsu forms instantly. The area we really should be working on is your chakra levels, chakra control and stamina, but something tells me you wouldn't be too happy about that. Sasuke frowned as he stared at the man, but stayed silent. He wasn't wrong. You hate repetition and training that doesn't reward direct results. If I were to just focus on those while I helped your teammates, you'd be even grumpier than normal. I think Kenjutsu is a happy medium. It is not something you can just copy with your Sharingan once you have it, and it can be quite a soothing experience. Besides, I'll throw in a few Raishin Jutsu for you to learn in the mix to shake things up. Sound like a plan? Sasuke stared down at the wooden blade as he spun it around. He couldn't deny he liked the sound of that. He nodded as stared back at his sensei and he gripped the handle in his hands. He seemed to pause as a question popped in his mind. Actually, sensei, there is something that has been bothering me. Kakashi patiently waited for him to continue. If he was finally opening up, he wanted him to do it at his own pace. I've come to realize a problem I have, and I don't know how to fix it. It seemed to really be bugging him, for he had said the last few words through clenched teeth. Go on. I have realized a flaw that I have that I am not too proud of, he clenched out. Kakashi couldn't help himself. Oh, has my little student finally discovered the wonders of the female anatomy? I guess it's to be expected with Hinata-chan drenched in water every day. It's perfectly normal for a boy your age. Sasuke sent him a glare through crimson cheeks and Kakashi just chuckled. Kidding. What's really on your mind? I have realized I can lose my cool a little too quickly. Especially when thinking about a certain matter. Ah, so that's what this is about. You can't stop thinking about that day, can you? Sasuke's tightened grip on the handle was all the answer he needed. Speaking from personal experience, I know what it's like to lose everyone you care about. Sasuke was surprised as he stared back at him. Kakashi motioned him to sit and he joined him on the soft grass. I've been around a lot longer than you have, and I know what it's like having everyone you love disappear. Friends, lovers, teachers, family. I've been through it all. How do you deal with it? Does the pain ever go away? No. It never will. If you try to be by yourself and push others away, it only makes things worse. Like I'm sure you have, I threw myself in training and work. I joined ANBU and went on mission after mission just to keep my head clear, but that never works. Eventually, it all comes back to haunt you. Sasuke stared down at the ground as he gripped the wooden handle in his hand. That's not to say it can't get better. Even after pushing them away, I had friends who stuck by me and helped me frown drowning in my own misery. You'll probably meet some of them sometime, but I warn you one in particular can be quite the character, he said as thoughts of green spandex burst into his mind. Sasuke was quiet as the memory of his teammates trying to help him a few nights ago came to mind. I assume you brought this up because it was affecting your attempts at tree climbing. How did you know that? He shrugged. I could tell you were having a hard time clearing your head. If I had to bet, the reason you are bringing this up is because you've noticed your thoughts are making it harder for you to focus your chakra. Am I wrong? Sasuke's silence was all the answer he needed. Meditation and training doesn't work. Believe me, I've tried, and I bet you have as well. I'd advise finding a hobby that puts you at ease. Whenever these thoughts return, just focus on your hobby. What did you do to overcome it? Kakashi actually scratched his head and seemed embarrassed. Well, that's more of a story for another time, but let's just say I haven't exactly followed the most healthful example. To keep it brief, let's say I'm emulating someone I cared about and not exactly all of his attributes can be considered positive. The image of the man's orange book made Sasuke frown and stare disapprovingly at his sensei. I'm not going to get over my problems with smut, you pervert. Nor should you. A healthier example is probably how I raised my ninken. They were a positive support that allowed me to reach out to others as well as further my ability on the battlefield. What you eventually decide is up to you. But I don't know what I like to do, he quietly muttered. I thought so. Take some time next weekend to go out in the village and explore. Try to make a friend or two. Look for new activities that pique your interest. It doesn't have to be much, but at least give it a shot. Sasuke nodded as he thought it over. I'll try. Kakashi grinned as he stood up. That's all I can ask. Now, if that is all, are you ready to get started? Sasuke smirked and gripped the wooden blade in both hands. Ready whenever you are, Ero-sensei. He got a whack in the head for his comment, and Kakashi began working him through the first kata his own father had taught him many years ago. The other clone stared down at Hinata as she anxiously waited for him to begin. What are we going to focus on, sensei? Before we begin, I want to get something through your head. You are not as behind as you seem to think you are. Hinata was surprised by his blunt comment. What are you talking about, sensei? This conversation had been a long time coming. He had wanted to have this conversation day one, but the discovery of Naruto's Hiration and her positive interaction with the boys had held him up. It was finally time to break through that shell she had enveloped herself in. I can't read minds, but I can tell what you are thinking. You seem to think that you are behind the others. She yanked at her jacket as she stared at the ground. But it's true. They are both so gifted. Yes, they can be labeled as prodigies in one area or another, but why do you think that doesn't apply to you? Thoughts of her cousin raced through her mind as she stared at the ground. I'm no prodigy. I'm not that special when compared to them or even my own clan. What gives you that idea? I just know it. Her clan was always ready to remind her of that. She was always ridiculed when compared to the shining abilities of her younger sister or cousin. I want you to listen and listen well. I don't give a crap what the Hyuga elders think of you. She was shocked and started to stutter, but Kakashi cut her off. They must be as blind as they are old. What I see when I look at you is a determined young lady, who has already proved herself as an excellent kunoichi. You have already proved them wrong time and time again. You were the one that was accepted for your summoning contract, and you were the one that the stone monument responded to. Her tears were cut off by a loud gasp. How do you? He knelt in front of her. The Hokage filled me in on the situation. I don't know everything that is going on, but I do know you are in for a lot of shit sooner or later. I want to make sure that you know that you are worth more than you think you are. I don't know what the future holds for you, but I want you to know that I believe you can handle it. And I'm sure your teammates think so too. Tears streamed from her face as she launched herself onto Kakashi's chest. He rubbed her back and soothed her as she cried into his chest. His eyebrows narrowed as he held her. How long had it been since someone sat down and told her they believed in her? After several minutes, she finally calmed down and let go. She sniffled as she wiped away her tears. Sorry. Thank you, Kakashi-sensei. That meant a lot. I meant it. You are truly special, and they are fools for believing otherwise. While you might not think so, you are just as extraordinary as either of your teammates. Not many people your age can just develop their own techniques. Or did you think that was just something people did all the time? No, but Hinata, I can only think of one other person who managed to create their own original technique by your age, and you're staring at him. Maybe you are not as gifted in your clan's taijitsu as your clan want you to be, but so what? Some taijitsu styles are not for everyone. If it doesn't work for you, find something else. The thought shocked her to her core. The idea of the Juken being wrong contradicted everything she had ever been taught as a child. But my father. Your father is not here. You are my soldier, and you shall learn what I see fit. Understand? She wiped away the last of her tears and stared at him with renewed determination. Good. Now, this will not be easy, but I can already tell you what you need to focus on. For years, I have been irritated how the Hyuga never seem to grasp the concept to develop some long-distance techniques. Sure, they have their air palm technique, but that is extremely limited. I plan to teach you some Suitun Jutsu to fix this problem. This could also help her with her taijitsu problem as well, Kakashi thought to himself. He could tell that the Juken form she was using was too rigid for her style. When she fought, she was graceful and moved like water in and out from her opponent's attacks. He wouldn't be surprised if it turned out to be her chakra affinity. Learning some Suitun Jutsu could help her in the long run of altering her form, but they did not have time for that before they returned to missions. So our game plan is, working on increasing your chakra capacity, learning some new medical techniques, and working on your own developed techniques. Sound good? She nodded her head and straightened her back as she stared at him. She had made great strides over the 2 months with the boys, but she had still been lingering in that shell of hers. Maybe she would never be free of it, but he would try his damnedest to crack through it. Good. Now I made a promise when we first started our new training regiment, and I plan to stick to it. Turn on your Byakugan and watch closely. He began to concentrate and his hands began to become enveloped by a green light. She stared curiously as the chakra concentrated in his hands, but it did not seem agitated like most techniques. It seemed calming and smooth for some reason. I copied this technique a long time ago for emergency treatment on the battlefield. I'm no medic, so this was mostly for spot and go injuries. I'm sure a proper mednin will be able to help you with this in time, but for now, this will help you with healing tiny injuries. Your chakra control is already at a point where this won't be too difficult for you. Are you ready? She nodded as she closed her eyes and started concentrating on forming her chakra the same way he had. Before they truly got started, he could not help but make a final jab at her. We both know how much trouble Naruto gets himself in. This way you can get him shirtless as much you want, to heal all of those nasty scars. Her concentration dissipated in an instant as a blush furiously etched across her face. He chuckled and rubbed her hair as she tried to pull herself deeper into her jacket. He was actually starting to like these kids. The Hokage watched with his crystal ball as Kakashi began to crack down on all of his pupils. He was glad the man was opening up again. Each of his genin was bringing out a different side of him. Naruto was allowing him to settle the ghosts of his past, Hinata was allowing him to become the father figure that he had been absent in his own life, and Sasuke allowed him to reconcile for his own mistakes in dealing with his trauma. It was for this reason that he had paired him up with Sasuke. The two shared so much in common, that it would do the boy good to have a role model that had been in his shoes. They were making good progress, and he actually believed they would be ready for the slew of assignments he had ready for them once the allotted time had passed. He carefully sat the ball back behind his desk before he returned to two papers that held most of his attention. The first was a letter that needed to be handled with extreme care. For years now, Kiri had been swamped in a seemingly unending civil war over the extermination of blood limit users. Over the past few months, the rebel forces had faced some serious losses and were now on the defensive as the loyalists pushed in on them. The young leader of the rebel movement had sent them a letter requesting for aid in their endeavor. His heart went out to their plea, especially due to the number of blood limit users Konoha housed, but he did not need Danzo to help make his decision any easier. He had to decline their request for aid. Even if he agreed with their cause, it would not do for the village to side with the losing faction of another country's war. Unless they were able to gain the upper hand and truly start making some ground, he was afraid they were on their own. He hoped they could hold out for a couple of years and start pushing back, but it was wishful thinking. The other was the mission report he had assigned to Kitsune. 3 years ago, a patrol had come across a young family wandering in the forests along the border of river and fire country. They had gone through some severe trauma and their family had apparently been slaughtered by enemy shinobi. When arriving at the site of the attack, the field was littered with the remains of a battle, but there were no bodies or any evidence to help link back to their attackers. The young family was relocated to the village and the case was sadly considered dead. Without any leads, they could not do anything. That was until a recent blood test came back that had gravely concerned him. He had immediately reopened the case and ordered Kitsune to follow through with it. The context of the attack was now much more concerning. If his suspicions were correct, he would be facing an internal and international incident that the elemental nations had not been through before. Kekii Toda did not just appear out of nowhere. Chapter 18: Unsettling Developments. One more time. Like we've gone over before, it isn't about how much chakra you pump into the technique. It's about the rate you force the chakra out. Really take a deep breath and force your chakra out faster than before. Naruto flashed through 4 hand signs and took in a deep of air. Kitsune's instructions rang in his head: feel your chakra getting excited, let it build in your chest, then let it out as fast as you can. Katon, Fox Hellfire. The stream of fire burst from his mouth, lighting the target post ablaze. After a lot of time and effort, the flames were finally the distinctive white coloring of the Jutsu's second stage. Under the steady head of the white flames, the armored mannequin's metal plates began to bubble, with streaks of melted metal dripping down the side of the figure and onto the ground. After a couple of seconds, the flames began to change back to their yellow hue as Naruto's control began to waver. Alright, that's enough, Kakashi yelled as he began going through the hand signs for a Suiton Jutsu. Naruto's lungs cried out for air as he cut off the Jutsu. His chest felt extraordinarily warm and he gasped for breath as steam erupted from the contact of Kakashi's Suiton Jutsu on the smoldering pile ahead of him. They had been at this for days and he was thrilled by the progress he was making. He glanced over at the horde of clones moving in sync as they went through the katas Kakashi-sensei had shown them. It was like watching a dojo practicing together as rows upon rows of navy, orange, and yellow grunted and went through the motions of each kata. He also wistfully glanced at the 2 clones sitting off to the side as they got to just sit around and read all day. I think you've finally got it down, Kakashi said as he stared at the steaming remains of the training dummy. Naruto smiled triumphantly as he sat down on the ground. It had been 2 weeks since they had started individual training, and he had to say this was the most fun he had ever had. Sure, he loved the thrill of a prank and the chase that usually followed, but finally getting to see and feel his ability as a shinobi improving was a much greater high. He had only gotten faster during their spars and group conditioning sessions, and now his taijitsu was actually passable. I think that's about as far as you're going to get with me leading the helm on that jutsu, Kakashi said as he walked up to him. I've only ever seen the first 2 stages in person. You're going to have to ask Kitsune what's so special about the 3rd stage in person. Thanks for all the help, sensei. Have you seen Kitsune team, by the way? I haven't seen him in a while. Kakashi was silent before he answered. I wouldn't expect you to. He's off on an important mission for the Hokage right now. I don't know where it is, but I do know that it is going to be extremely difficult for him. He can handle it. Kitsune can handle anything thrown at him. Kakashi chuckled. I bet he can, but don't worry. He's not exactly on a dangerous mission, just a challenging one. It's just a graveyard mission. What does that mean? I'll tell you about it if you ever consider going into the ANBU Corps, he said as he ruffled his hair. Now, on to the next subject. I'd say we've made some good ground in your taijitsu. Your nasty shot earlier this morning is a testament to that. Naruto wickedly grinned as he recalled the events earlier that morning. While Hinata held most of his attention, he had finally been fast enough to get inside his sensei's guard and land a punch in Kakashi's left side, only to be reminded of his place and pummeled face first into the ground. It had actually stung Kakashi a little since the boy had been experimenting with his new density seals. The blonde's fist was so dense it had felt like he was being hit by cinderblock. Now, how are your clones doing working on the other technique Kitsune taught you? Naruto flinched as the feeling on an explosion tearing apart his body raced through his mind. Not very well, he grimaced. Is it still exploding in your hand? I don't understand it. The blonde uttered as he pulled at his hair. The whole idea of the jutsu seems wrong to me. The angrier you are the stronger it gets, but the angrier you are the harder it is for you to control the chakra. What am I doing wrong, sensei? Kakashi closed his eyes as he thought it over. Let me see you do it again. With a clone, he followed up as he noticed Naruto start to seize up. He let out a breath of relief as he summoned a new clone. Do I have to, boss? You know how much it hurts. It complained. Come on, you big baby. The sooner we get this down, the sooner we stop blowing ourselves up. Now get over there. The clone stuck its tongue out at him as it marched off towards its doom. Kakashi was starting to believe Sasuke was right in his observation about the blonde talking to his clones. They didn't just occasionally chat, they had full-on discussions. Naruto would rabble on and on with himself about the intricacies of Fuinjutsu, since there was simply no one else who had his same level of knowledge. He really hoped Jiraiya would return soon. The boy needed another outlet to bounce his ideas off of. Back to the matter at hand, as the clone began forming chakra in his hand, Kakashi raised the headband over his left eye. The return of his red eye surprised Naruto, but he ignored him as he focused on the chakra system of his clone. The clone was forming the jutsu in his right hand and concentrating all of the chakra into a singular point. The energy built up in this point began to dramatically heat up inside the enclosed space. Soon the leaking energy of the jutsu began forming as a dark crimson flame around his fist. At this point, these flames were still just his chakra converted into a different form, so his arm remained undamaged. He stood there for some time before he noticed the jutsu was beginning to become unstable. The longer the clone held the jutsu, the more chakra was being pumped through its core. However, the size of the flame outside of his palm was not changing. The jutsu was being backed up due to the limits of how much chakra could be released at a time. The pressure was too much, and before he could call out, the flame exploded in a raging inferno, incinerating the clone and everything within a 5-meter radius. The original flinched as the memories of being burned away flew back to his mind. I think I see two of the problems, Kakashi said as he lowered his headband back over his eye. The longer you hold the jutsu, the more chakra you have built inside of its core. You're limiting how much energy escapes to power up the jutsu, but by doing so, you are causing the pressure inside to build up, causing the explosion. Naruto nodded as he stared down at his hand. There is also the problem of what will happen if you manage to get it right. Assuming it doesn't explode in your hand, how will you manage to direct the explosion? Naruto looked surprised and bit his tongue at his own stupidity. I assume Kitsune had been teaching you this only through theory and demonstration. Kakashi asked as he watched his student have an internal battle. Naruto nodded, prompting him to continue. I think I see a solution. Try focusing on maintaining the pressure as you form the jutsu. When you are ready to discharge it, force a constant flow chakra through your arm towards the direction of travel before delivering the jutsu. This will direct the attack forward and not everywhere at once. Naruto was surprised, but anxious to give it a try. He summoned another clone, which did not bother arguing as he raced over to the middle of the field. He stared at a training post with newfound determination as he began molding the jutsu again. The blisteringly hot chakra began swirling in his hands, and once the crimson flames began dancing around his palm, he began racing towards the post. He could feel the built-up chakra threatening to burst, but he pushed through it as he drew closer to the post. Come on! Come on! Hold it! He slammed his hand forward into the post as he pushed his chakra as hard as he could through his arm and shouted, "Katon, Wrath's Inferno." The chakra wave slammed into the condensed energy and forced it forward as the fire raged forth in a burning inferno through the dummy. This time it was directed away from him in a narrow cone facing outward and left a simmering hole through center of the training post. The clone looked just as surprised as the original did. Smiles lit up both of their faces as they began dancing with one another, with the chanting support of the Taijitsu clones in the background. The kid is just something else, Kakashi thought as he stared at the dancing blondes. He was making amazing progress, and his teammates weren't slouching either. Sasuke scoffed as another explosion ripped through the forest. The blonde just didn't understand the definitions of subtly. Sasuke was crouching in the bushes as he tried to catch a glimmer of his sensei's clone. His hand tightly gripped the handle of his katana as he stared off into the trees. He noticed a leaf fluttering to the ground and sprung into action. He immediately let loose 8 shuriken with wire attached up into the trees. He yanked them as they tied around an object hiding behind the tree's central mass. He sprinted up the tree, and swung his sword clear through the immobilized object. He gritted his teeth as the metal cleanly sliced through the block of wood and quickly turned around to parry the attack from his sensei. "Very good, Sasuke, but you're going to have to be quicker than that." The two began trading swift blows as Sasuke used everything in his power to outmaneuver the older man. Sparks flew as metal clashed. They fought for dominance on the branch of a tree, and Sasuke could feel himself being pushed back by the man's superior strength. He kicked off the tree towards the ground. He sailed through 3 hand signs and pointed a finger right at his sensei. "Right-un, volt shot." He rang. Lighting swirled around the tip of his finger in the shape of an arrow and shot off towards his sensei. It raced at him at so rapidly that even with his incredible speed, he only had a few milliseconds to dodge. As it raced over his chest, he let go of his katana as the jutsu made contact with the steel blade. "Very clever," he thought as he jumped after the boy. "If I had been holding that, the electricity would have coursed through this body and dispelled me. He's making fine use of the jutsu I've taught him." He hadn't been slouching on the kenjutsu either, he noted as he pulled out a kunai as Sasuke jumped up to meet him midair. "Suetun, water bullet." Hinata thought as a stream of water burst from her mouth. The stream crashed into the trees as she raced after her sensei. He ducked behind another tree as she raced through 3 more seals. "Suetun, pressure stream," she thought as the size of the stream of water started to decrease. Instead, it became more focused as the linear blast of water cleanly cut through the tree. Kakashi ducked out from under the tree and started racing away. She chased after him, slicing through tree after tree. He pushed chakra into his legs and burst ahead of her. As he became out of range, she cut off her chakra and chased after him. After several minutes, she chased him until she found him hiding behind a tree several feet from her. Her Byakugan could clearly see his huddled form as he started to lean out to look for her. "Sensei, I can see you. You can't hide from my line of sight." "Really now?" She noticed something falling from above and littered it in a barrage of kunai. She was surprised when she noticed it was just a block of wood. Her heart picked up as she saw her sensei had burst from his hiding place and was racing towards her. He had been trying to trick her to draw her attention. Her palms glowed blue as she reached out to intercept him. As she was about to make contact, she was shocked when he vanished from her field of view. In front of her was the log she had turned into a pincushion. Her eyes widened as her sensei reappeared in her Byakugan view in the spot above her. A double bluff. He raced down towards her only for her to replace herself with the log he had just used himself. He landed with a crouch and slowly rose to stare at her as she danced out of his range. She was always so quick on her feet. She was getting faster, he noted, and her work to increase her reserves had certainly been visible when she had switched between the 2 jutsu. Her white eyes stared him down, as she began concentrating her chakra in her hands. From what she had told him, this was not the final product, but this part of her technique certainly had its own uses. He had felt them firsthand. She clenched her palms as a set of blue, blazing teeth began to form in front of them. She raced towards the man as she whispered, "Gentle step, twin lion fangs." He desperately dodged and weaved as she raced towards him with those sharp rows of teeth. Even when they didn't make contact, he could feel his chakra being drained away. It was like the teeth literally sank into the chakra emanating from his body and yanked it away. The more she took from him, the faster she was. It was getting so troublesome for a clone. Sooner or later, she was going to get lucky and he would make a mistake, causing her to pop him. Yet this made him happy as he ducked under another strike. Oh, they were turning into quite the little monsters. He was so proud. The Hokage chuckled as he scrolled through Team 7's latest report. Kakashi had kept his word. Each of them was pushing forward at a phenomenal rate. It would seem like his gambit would pay off, and would have a newly invigorate Team 7 once they returned to active duty. He just hoped the genin themselves could keep a lid on it. He had already faced questions from Kurenai, and he couldn't have Asuma thinking he was playing favorites. He was distant from his son as it was. The last thing he needed was Naruto bragging off to the other teams that they got to skip the mandatory D-rank missions just to focus on training. Sasuke had taken to Kenjutsu rather well. He was rather comfortable with the form, but apparently had not found a sword size he was comfortable with yet. That was something to fix on his own time. He had added a few Raishin Jutsu under his belt, and he was sure Kakashi had plenty more to teach him after he activated his Sharingan. Hinata had truly flourished. Having a positive motivator had worked wonders for her. The Sandame had understood Hayashi's method of training in her childhood, but it was evident that it had backfired on him. While he was sure the man wanted to apologize and try again, it would look bad for his reputation as the stern, cold leader of the Hyuga. He needed to ease her into a more gentle view of him, and not all at once. While it pained him to watch, he silently gave Kakashi his blessings as he trained his daughter. Just as the Sandame had suspected, she took after her mother. She had convinced her mother's summons to allow her to sign the scroll, and she even took after her natural inclination to develop new jutsu. Hitomi Hyuga had been a rather peculiar member of that family. The elders were not exactly fond of her kind and diplomatic outlook, but they would never deny that she had been a wonderful addition to the clan. The amount of new jutsu she had developed was only rivaled by the creations of the clan's original founders. She had been instrumental in the Third Ninja War, and thanks to her, the nuisance of the Crimson Colony had finally been terminated. She and the last generation of the Inoshikacho formation had been sent in and managed to kill the queen. Hinata was following in her footsteps and was already creating her own jutsu. She would need the unexpected edge in the battles ahead of her. Finally, Naruto had flourished under private tutelage. With those shadow clones, he was burning through material as fast as Kakashi could give him. He had already raced through the first 2 advanced series books, and had apparently done a fine job of mastering the techniques Kitsune had taught him. Speaking of which, the Hokage turned his thoughts to his loyal operative who was still out in the field. His investigation had been going on now for 3 weeks. He was very curious of his results. The man in question was pausing for a moment to take in sights of the rolling hills of river country. The land of rivers was a rather beautiful and prosperous country that greatly benefited from their neighbors' proficient military might. After all, it was in the land of fire's best interest to protect their smaller neighbor Du River country's wide-reaching agricultural influence. The soil was incredibly rich due to the numerous rivers that streamed from the mountains to the north. That wasn't to say they were completely helpless without the land of fire. In fact, the land of rivers had a shinobi force of their own, but they allowed Konoha shinobi to pass through as they pleased. While other countries may have considered river countries' attitude toward this relationship a bit naive, it was actually in their best interest to let the Konoha shinobi go about their business. To the river daimyo, any chance of a threat from Konoha was easily outshadowed by the more tangible threat from Sunigakure. During the past 2 shinobi wars, Sunigakure had been a bit all too eager for the chance of enveloping river country into their borders. The addition of river country's rich agricultural lands would reduce a considerable economic burden from wind country's finances. On top of this hovering threat, the river daimyo had actually known both the 2nd and 3rd Hokage personally. As long as he knew Hiruzen remained in power, he did not fear any military actions from the land of fire. So if their neighbors wanted to pass through with business that benefited them both, who were they to complain? Tearing his eyes away from the horizon, Kitsune brought his attention back to the trees in front of him. While it was easy to miss at first glance, anyone who took a closer look would notice the scars left from the battle that had taken place here. The trees and plants had done their best to cover the evidence over time, but there were some things that couldn't be hid completely. He slowly ran his hand along the bark of a tree, feeling where wind-enhanced chakra had left deep gashes. Spikes of stone still jutted from the ground haphazardly, though now their tips were dulled with time and covered in moss. Taking one last glance at the cut in the tree, he leapt down from the branch and began making his way towards the center of the wreckage. He reached into his pouch and pulled out the cylindrical wooden totem, engraved with the caricature of a fox, and placed it on the ground. He took a few steps back before running through hand signs. Fox style, illusory totem jutsu, he cried as he slammed his hands into the ground. For more pillars that were considerably larger rose from the ground and surrounded him. Each was an ivory white, with red markings along the outline of the fox's features. 4 sets of eyes began glowing purple as a thin stream of chakra began to flow from each of them into the tiny totem on the ground. As this was underway, Kitsune bit into his thumb and smeared the blood along his palm. He whipped through another 4 hand signs and slammed his hands into the ground. Summoning Jutsu. A puff of white smoke enveloped the scene, accompanied by the sounds of heavy coughing and gagging. A tiny figure emerged from the smoke, waving their hand in front of their face as they tried to clear away the smoke. My dear boy, please give me a bit more heads up next time. Cough, cough, you caught me. Excuse me. Caught me mid-yawn as I was getting ready to settle down for the evening. I deeply apologize, Huli-sama. I should have let you know in advance. Kitsune apologized as he sank to one knee and offered a deep bow to the bespectacled fox. Thank you for coming to my request. I am honored by your presk. Oh, stop with the pleasantries already, my boy. The elder croaked as he straightened his back with a satisfying pop, before sighing in relief and resting his weight on his cane. Kitsune nodded in acknowledgement as he stared at the older, gray fox. Compared to his peers, Huli was much smaller than the average summons. The tip of his head barely reached above the boy's kneecaps. 4 tails waved behind as he smiled up at the boy. Lady, she may demand your respects, but you know full well I am fine without them. Let's get down to business already, my young Yuzu. You know I don't like being called that. Kitsune hissed, cutting him off. The boy's outburst didn't seem to faze the fox at all. Instead he lightly cackled, still so stingy. You don't need to be so protective all the time, my boy. The teenager clenched his teeth behind his mask, before taking a deep breath and nodding. He knew he really shouldn't let that get under his skin, but his familial name was still somewhat of a sore spot with him. It was how he got in this absurd situation in the first place. Good. Now, what impossible task do we find ourselves with this time? Kitsune reached down and passed the old fox the small totem. It was a clever trick devised by the foxes centuries ago. Similar to the Inoichi techniques, the totem allowed its wielder access to another person's memories. It could reach deep into their psyche and dig up even the most repressed memories. In combination with illusory totem jutsu, it could project those memories outwards from the perspective of the person they were taken from. I have been tasked with investigating the events that lead to a pair of orphan siblings seeking sanctuary in the village. They were believed to have been the victims of a random bandit attack, but the Hokage now believes there is more to it. Poor things, the Huli sighed and glancing at the leftover battlefield around them. Who watches over them now? They mostly take care of themselves. The eldest, the girl, has a job in the village, and provides for herself and her younger brother. Quite the heavy burden to force on one so young, Huli muttered before glancing up at his young protege. Any leads? That is what we are here to find, Huli-sama. The old fox nodded before sitting back on his tails and weaving through hand signs with his front paws. Huli was one of the oldest amongst the fox clan. What he lacked in size, he made up for with his wisdom and cunning. While more than a majority of the elders believed that he was growing far too amiable in his old age, none would dismiss his insight and opinions out of hand. Yes, they respected his knowledge and abilities all right, Kitsune thought to himself as he watched Huli work, but that didn't mean they liked him. The tiny fox clasped his paws together and all of the color of the world began to melt away. The world had become almost grayscale, which began to contrast against the red mist that began pooling at the base of the totems. Slowly the mist began to form a line and trickled towards a set of thick bushes to their right. The young girl must have spent most of her time hiding there, Huli muttered, easing off his tails and back onto his feet. Good. Then let's get started, Kitsune replied, clasping his hands together. The clap echoed off the silent trees as the 4 totems rose from the ground. Keeping the rectangular shape, the totems began hovering around him at a fixed distance. Alright, let's see what happened. Whenever you are ready, my boy, the old fox stated as Kitsune formed another hand sign. The saturated sky instantly shifted into the darkness of night as the memory was projected before their eyes. The trees in the thicket were set ablaze and dark shapes clashed alongside the road. The scene was made more disturbing by the appearance of 2 shivering children sitting beside the young girl. So this is her, Huli muttered as he walked up to the brunette girl. I thought you said she had only one brother. I did. There wasn't a response to the implication as the memory pressed on. It was another 3 minutes before a word was spoken. Pause, Huli instructed, with a small wave of his paw. The old fox walked around Kitsune as he began to inspect the phantom images begin to appear before them. At the moment, they were just a blur, but even now, they could both make out the distinct shape of a kunai jutting overhead in one of the individual's hands. Go second by second. Kitsune slowed the projection as they watched two dark forms clash. The occasional spark of metal was the only light they received in the dark woods. Kitsune brought the memory to a stop as the girl's mother came into view. Beneath his mask, Kitsune frowned at the sight of the mother, who was now sporting a headband she hadn't been wearing before. IWA. Well, this is certainly a complication, Huli mused, glancing at the young shinobi. Kitsune made no response as he continued the memory. They watched from the girl's point of view as her mother engaged her attackers. They were really not making things easy for the pair of investigators. The assailants were dressed in hooded robes and the darkness was giving them no good look at their faces. The trio of children watched helplessly as their parents engaged their onslaught of attackers. They seemed to be holding out pretty well at first, but the sheer numbers of their opponents were starting to get the better of them. As time went on, all it took was one misstep as the mother made an unstable landing, allowing one of the hooded figures to rush under the mother's guard and slash her across the chest. She let out a scream of pain as three more shadows quickly converged on her, impaling her on their blades. Kitsune's composure remained unchanged, while Huli grimaced at the image. He would have preferred to turn the audio off, but they needed every lead they could get. He tried to ignore the children's screams at the sight of their mother to no avail. The hooded figures immediately turned towards the sound of their voices, and the two finally got a good look at the assailants. Three expressionless, white masks started back at them before darting in their direction. ANBU, Kitsune said, narrowing his eyes. He noted that the masks did not bear the markings of any particular village's ANBU core, making it all the more difficult to identify them. There was another flash of sparks as the children's father appeared in front of them, holding back the three aggressors. Run! He hoarsely shouted back as he shrugged back the ANBU agent's blades and began lashing out at the one to his left. The father was able to land two clean cuts across the agent's chest, only to receive three of his own from the other agents for the trouble. This was the last time the girl had a look at her father before turning around fleeing with the other children. The vision became blurred as the girl ran through forest. They heard a ripping sound, as a bush tore off a piece of her jacket. They followed the mirage images of the girl, as she was pulled along by her older brother away from the main road. She glanced back and the phantom image of her younger brother appeared on her back. They ran for several minutes before the observers noticed something wrong. These were just children, and would never have spotted it, but Kitsune did. The girl had missed a dark figure appear up in the trees. Shortly after, she was knocked to the ground and the vision became blurry. Blow to the back of the head, Huli stated as he stroked his chin with his paw. They continued as the young girl looked up and were surprised by a new figure entering the frame. Kitsune scowled as he stared at a cloaked figure holding the eldest brother by his throat. For some reason, the image of the man unsettled the pair as they watched it stare down at the other siblings. They felt a chill roll over their skin as he clicked his tongue and started speaking. No, no. I only need just one. So which of you shall it be? The eldest? He asked as he tightened his grip on the boy's throat, or the youngest? The middle one is useless to me. The boy in his grasp lashed out, raining blows on his chest, which the figure didn't seem to mind. Don't you dare touch them. Well, you've got spirit, the man chuckled as he drew the boy closer. The boy reared back and shot a right hook straight at his captor's face, only to shock both him and the observers as the fist seemed to pass right through the strange mask. The man lowered his hood and stared at the young boy as if examining him. I guess you'll have to do. It will certainly allow me to move up my timetable. Congratulations, boy, you are our lucky winner. The boy struggled as the man returned his attention to the struggling children before him. Now, what to do with you two? The question hung in the air, only causing the boy in his grasp to struggle harder. Well, I suppose it doesn't hurt to keep the spare. Besides, spiting Yuta is a gift in and of itself. Say goodbye to your siblings, boy. I'm saving them from a fate far worse than yours. The world began to contort, as the area around the man's eye seemed to swirl and suck in the two children. The boys screamed out their names as they and Kitsune stood there in silence as the memory ended. Whatever came next happened somewhere else. This presents a troubling situation, Huli finally spoke as he began wiping his glasses. We've got new players on the board. Kitsune was silent as he rewound the memory, his eyes taking in every detail as he gazed at the man. Even now, the man seemed to be taunting him, gazing at the pair with a tilted head. Masks came face to face with each other as he inspected the spiral orange shape. Who are you? That's it for part 4. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.